Today, we're going to be talking about financing your education. So you all might be looking at that title and say, what does that even mean? So some of you might have heard of the FAFSA, some of you have heard of the DREAM application. So we're going to talk about both of those applications, and we're going to go into specifics about what type of assistance there is for you to help you pay for your education. That way, when you're applying, you're not necessarily just looking at the price tag, but you're also looking at the schools you want to attend and what type of environment they have. Ultimately, we want you to leave today with more knowledge that you can use for yourself while you're applying if you haven't submitted your application yet. And so you can also share with your friends, because this information is very valuable, especially for incoming students. Next slide, please. So if you apply for financial aid, that means that you're going to get access to money. And this money is money that you can use to help pay for any college you'd like to attend. So that could be a four-year public school. It could be a private college, a community college. And this means that because you have money to pay for school, you have options and you can make choices among the schools that you decide to attend. So you can look at, other than just looking at the price tag, you can look at the academics of that school. You can look at the culture, if it's a social fit for you. Again, you don't have to be so worried about how much you're going to have to pay, because you're going to have financial aid to help you and back you up. So again, when you're looking at schools, you want to do research. You want to see how big the school is, how many students there are, what the ratio is in classes. That way you're sure that this is a school you want to attend. And by applying to aid, these are things that you can also look at. Again, not just the price tag. Next slide, please. So when you're comparing costs to the schools, you want to look at the tuition costs, and there are some other costs that will be related, and we'll talk about that in a couple more slides. But you want to look at the tuition costs. For example, for community college, the tuition is $1,104. So some of you might think, wow, like that's so inexpensive. I want to go to community college. Well, yes, it is pretty inexpensive, and there is also financial aid for you to attend community college, but there's also aid for the rest of the schools. So you can attend community college such as San Diego City College. You can attend Grossmont College as well. But if you think that a Cal State is more your vibe, then you can also attend a Cal State like Cal State LA, Long Beach, and you'll also receive financial aid to help you pay for that tuition amount of $5,742. Now, if UC San Diego's your dream, obviously, or if you want to attend UC Berkeley or even UCLA, you do have a price tag for tuition of $12,570. Again, there is assistance to help you pay for that, even though you might see that it's a little bit more expensive. At the end of the day, with a combination of funding available, you might be able to pay for half or maybe all of your tuition with financial aid. Finally, we're going into the private colleges, which tend to be a lot more expensive than our public schools. So we have a starting price of $40,000 for schools such as USC, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, all of the really big names. And they also provide financial aid, but like you can see, it is more expensive. So potentially, the higher the cost of your school is, the more financial aid you'll need in order to help you pay for this. And I did mention that you can look at the tuition, but you also have to keep in mind the other costs that are related to school. So we're going to talk about that in the next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So the other costs that are related to attending university would be things such as your room and board. So you got your classes paid for. Financial aid is helping you get those classes, but you also have to think about where you're going to live. Some of you might think, okay, well, I'm going to commute to and from school every day. So even though you're not paying rent, you also have to take into consideration what the gas price is, if you're going to buy a car to commute to school, if you're going to ride your bike. So a bike's going to need maintenance at some point. If you're riding a motorcycle, you have to pay for parking space on campus. So you want to take into consideration your room and board, but also your transportation if you're deciding to travel to and from school. Now, if you're not traveling to and from school and you're going to be living in the dorms, then you also want to take a look at how much that room is going to cost you. Are you going to live in a double with another person? That means that you're sharing a room. Are you going to have your single room, which means that you have a room all to yourself, but it's going to be even more expensive? Or if it's available, will you be living in the cheapest option, which tends to be a triple room occupancy? So you have to keep that in mind as well, because room and board, especially in cities that are very popular like San Diego, tend to be a little bit more expensive than in rural areas. Finally, you can also decide to get an apartment with people that are also attending the school that you would like to go to, and that might be cheaper. But then at that point, you have to consider how much the rent is in the area. So you can go online and you can just Google how much does it cost to rent an apartment here. That way you have an idea how much it's going to cost you to pay for rent in that area. Now that you've thought about your room and board, you've thought about your tuition, you also have to think about your personal expenses. So how are you going to get by through college without those self-care items? How are you going to get by without your latte or your face mask or shampoo? So you also have to think about these things when you're calculating your expenses. You can easily say my tuition is covered, I have a place to sleep, but what else? So that what else amount that you think of is what you're going to estimate to also help you realize what your total cost is going to be for attending this school. Finally, we have these books and supplies. So with the books and supplies, you want to make sure you figure out all of your options when purchasing books. So you don't necessarily have to buy a new copy all the time. You can also buy used books or you can rent books, and those are ways to save. But these are amounts that you're going to have to consider in your budget. You're going to have a new class potentially every 3 or every 6 months. So that means you're going to have to be buying several books throughout the year, and that does add up, which is why it's something we include in our cost of attendance for the year. Next slide, please. So when you apply to financial aid, you're not just getting money from the government. You're getting money from different sources. So yes, a very large part is coming from the federal government, who provides us with things such as the Pell Grant and our student loans. We also get money from the state government, who's providing things such as the Cal Grant if you're a California state. And we have funding from universities. So if you're attending UC San Diego, potentially you can be eligible for university money. If you're attending a private school, potentially they'll have their own pot of money that they'll be able to provide you a scholarship with. So those are 3 funding sources. And finally, we have a private agency. So that's any like scholarship money that you're receiving from any clubs you've joined or any veteran benefits that you might be receiving to help you pay for tuition. Those are also considered private agencies. So when we offer you your financial aid, or when the school you attend offers your financial aid, we're going to take that combination of all of these places and all the money we get from these organizations, from the government, from these private agencies, and help you pay for your total cost of attendance, which is what we just talked about in the previous slide. Next slide, please. So we talked about where this money is coming from. Now let's get a little bit deeper into what this money actually is. So I did say financial aid, but what is financial aid? Financial aid is a combination of gift aid, loans, and work study. Specifically, gift aid is referring to any grants or scholarships that you might be receiving. Again, these grants could be coming from the school, or they can be coming, scholarships can be coming from private agencies, such as the clubs you've attended. This means that grants and scholarships, because they are gift aid, so gift money, you don't have to pay this money back. So if you get gift aid or free money, you basically take it, you pay for your tuition, you pay for your housing, and you don't have to pay any of it back at the end of the year or by the time of graduation. Gift aid includes things such as the Pell Grant, the Cal Grant, any scholarship money you're receiving. And then on the opposite end of that, we have the loans. So a loan is borrowed money, and it's money that needs to be repaid with interest at the end of your once you've graduated and once that your grace period is over. For the subsidized and the unsubsidized loan, the grace period is 6 months, but with the subsidized loan, you're actually not accruing interest while you're in school. So that means that if you borrow $3,500 from a subsidized loan, by the time you have to pay that back, you'll still owe $3,500 because the interest has been on pause and has not been accruing since you borrowed the loan. However, with unsubsidized loans, that one does accrue interest while you're in school. So if you borrow $1,000 of the loan, by the time you hit repayment, so that's 6 months after graduation, you have to pay back that $1,000 plus any interest. We also offer a third loan, which is a Parent Plus loan, and it's not included in this slide. But a parent loan is a loan that your parents would borrow on your behalf. So if you're finding that aside from the gifts money and your personal student loans, you still need a little bit more assistance, we do offer the Parent Plus loan. So you want to make sure you ask your school about that in case it's something that you're interested in. Now, I do want to let you all know that with private loans, we want to emphasize that you want to borrow wisely. So you don't want to just borrow money because it's on your offer. You want to borrow it because you need to borrow it. So remember, these do have to be paid back. Ideally, you'll be applying for scholarships to reduce the amount of your loan. And we'll talk about tips to apply in a couple of slides. But ideally, you apply to more scholarships so you reduce the loans. But if you absolutely need the loans, you want to make sure, again, to borrow wisely. Finally, we have work study, and work study is a job opportunity offered through the government, where basically you're earning money as you're learning. Earn as you learn. Basically, with work study, it's a benefit that we get because when you're working under this program, half of your hourly wage will be coming from the government, while the other half will be coming from your lender. You don't really get to see this part on your end, but you will be receiving an hourly wage, let's say of $15. And the source of this $15 is $7.50 from the government and $7.50 from your actual employer. So by the end of your term, so let's say you're getting paid every 2 weeks, you'll be getting a check that'll add up to the amount of hours that you worked, which can in turn help you out with paying for books, for those personal expenses we talked about earlier. And you can be working in an on-campus position or with an off-campus partner to the school that you're attending. I actually was a work study student back in my day. I started off at a daycare, and then I transitioned into working as a scholarships assistant with the financial aid office over at UCLA. And I actually transitioned into a full-time staff. So this work study opportunity that I got as a student really helps me out and continues to help me out because I was able to set down some roots in the university and also get experience as a student in order to transition into a full-time career once I've graduated. It was seamless. So I would really recommend, if you have work study in your offer letter, taking a position that you're interested in and potentially being hired once you're out of school. Next slide, please. So we talked about gift aid, and the Blue and Gold plan is also considered gift aid, and it's a promise that the UC schools make to California residents. So in order to be eligible for this Blue and Gold opportunity plan, your family income needs to be less than $80,000, and you must qualify based on your application for the FAFSA or the DREAM application. Basically, what the Blue and Gold opportunity plan does, it promises that if your tuition is not being covered in full and you qualify for, you're under that $80,000 mark, you submitted your applications on time, then the UC Blue and Gold opportunity plan will step in and help you finish paying for tuition with gift aid. So I'll give you an example. Our gift aid is $12,570. And let's say that you received an external scholarship of $5,000 and you're getting a Pell Grant for $4,000. That remaining gap between the amount you received and the $12,570 will be covered with the Blue and Gold Opportunity Plan, which means that in total, your tuition of $12,570 will be covered in free money. So you don't have to use the loans to pay for your tuition because you're going to have that combination of gift aid to help you out. Next slide, please. Now, the middle class scholarship is not an opportunity that is offered through the UC specific schools. It's also offered through CSU, so California State Universities, and it's offered to our California residents whose family income is below $191,000 or less, or their total household assets is below that amount. You do also have to submit your application on time. So I hope that by now you've noticed a pattern when I say that you have to submit your application on time to be eligible for most of these awards. And even though the middle class scholarship is not for the full amount of $12,570, it will help you pay for some portion of your tuition. So you want to make sure, again, apply on time. And if you want to know a little bit more information about the middle class scholarship, I would suggest you visit the CSAC website. That's the California Student Aid Commission website at www.csag.california.gov, because not only can you learn about the middle class scholarship there, but you can also learn about the Cal Grant on that website. So I would highly recommend noting that down and visiting the website. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So now our favorite portion, which is a scholarship search and scholarship tips. So you want to make sure that you're applying for scholarships. You want to make sure you're dedicating time to apply to scholarships because it's free money. So like I mentioned in the previous slide, if you want to reduce your loan offers, if you basically want to leave school debt free, what you want to do is you want to apply for as many scholarships as you can. You can go to these websites that are listed on here. So like FAFSA, San Diego Foundation for students who are coming from the San Diego area or San Diego County. And you also want to visit the websites of the schools that you are interested in. So if you're interested in attending a private college, or if you're interested in attending a Cal State or a UC, you want to go ahead and visit their website and see what resources they have in order to, one, apply for the scholarships, what names you see out there. And sometimes they'll even have tips on what things to include or how to phrase your personal statements, how to write your resume, things like that. So you want to make sure you're visiting not only these general websites, but get specific and go to the website of the schools you want to apply, because that's potentially money that has not been accounted for. And that could be going to you if you do apply. You want to take time. You also want to take time in applying because you want to make sure that your personal statement is telling your story and telling it well. That way, when someone's reviewing your application, they're like, wow, this student's amazing. I want to give them this money. So you want to go ahead and spend time on writing that personal statement. With each application, you can adjust the personal statement as needed. So you can apply to multiple scholarships, and potentially all that work that you put into that one single personal statement can really pay out and give you a $1,000 scholarship, a $5,000 scholarship, or even a recurring scholarship. And that's a scholarship that you'll get every year. So if you're at UC San Diego for 4 years, then you'll get that scholarship every single year. My old roommate actually applied to a scholarship that I didn't apply to, and she ended up getting $5,000 every year for free. And the only thing she had to do was submit like certain community service hours every year, and it was not a lot. So I would highly recommend looking at the resources out there and also looking directly with the school website so you can find these scholarships to reduce your need for loans and to also just help you get through college without having to worry about how you're going to pay for it, because you have a bunch of scholarships to cover everything. Next slide, please. So we talked about scholarships, we talked about gift aid, loans, work study. So how do you apply for all of this? You apply through the FAFSA or the DREAM application. You don't submit both, you just submit one of them. So for the FAFSA, you apply on studentaid.gov. And for the DREAM application, you'll apply at dream.csac.california.gov. And both of these have a deadline for California of March 2nd. So I'll repeat it again. Make sure you submit this application on time because it's very, very important in order for you to be eligible for most of the gift aid that is offered from schools. In order to apply, you are going to have to create a login. So for all of those students who are familiar with creating user profiles or profiles in general online, basically this ID that you create for FAFSA, it'll be an FSA ID. That'll be your login. So make sure that you always have it on hand when you're going to access the application, and make sure that you have it somewhere written down because you don't want to forget this ID. For our DREAMAC students, you were going to have a CSAC ID, and same thing, you always want to make sure you have it on hand before you begin your application because you're going to need it. Make sure you don't forget it. So write it down somewhere that you know you can access. Next slide, please. So like I mentioned, please don't submit both applications. You only need to submit one. So for US citizens or permanent residents, you want to go ahead and submit the FAFSA at studentaid.gov. For our California DREAM application, that's for our students who do not have lawful status or who are AB 540. So again, please don't submit both. You only need to submit one of them, and make sure that your information is correct on each of the applications. Next slide, please. Now, for those students who feel more comfortable using their phones than an actual computer, you can actually download an app to complete your FAFSA application. So it's available both on the Apple Store and on Google Play. So again, if you feel like you spend more time on your phone, you can actually just download the app and complete it all there. If you find while you're completing the app, even though it's user-friendly, very user-friendly, but you find that for some reason you just can't get comfortable with using the app to fill out such an important application, you can move over to your desktop, but remember, you need to know your FSA ID to be able to log in. Next slide, please. There's gonna be 7 action items within, or 7 sections to these forms. So the first section is gonna be the student demographics. So basically they wanna know what your name is, when you were born, what high school you went to, and they also want to know your social security number in order to be able to obtain your information. The second portion would be for you to select your top 10 schools. So the schools that you want this application to go to. So if you see San Diego is your number 1, you want to make sure that you include us in that top 10, because whatever school's not on that list will not receive your financial information. Although I hope that you get into all the schools you apply to, sometimes that's not the case. So if you're applying to more than 10 schools, you want to make sure that as you're getting your acceptance/denials, that you're adding the schools that you didn't initially add. That way they can receive your financial information. If for some reason we're not your number 1 and we're number 11, then you want to make sure if for some reason you weren't accepted to another school, you add UC San Diego to that list so we can provide you with an offer letter. Because if we don't have the applications on file, then we won't be able to offer you any financial aid. So just make sure that as you're receiving your information of what schools you're going to attend, you update the list based on where you actually want to go and who you want to offer you financial aid. The third section is going to ask you about your dependency status. So are you currently at the age of 24? Are you married? Have you been in the military? If all of these questions if all of these answers are no, then that means you're going to be considered a dependent student, which is why we're going to be asking for parents' information. If you answer yes to one of these questions, then you're considered independent and we won't need your parent information. But either way, we are going to need, for our dependent students, we are going to need that parent information. So we're going to need to know your parents' name. We're going to need to know what level of education they have. We want to know their social security numbers. If for some reason they don't have a social security number, then you can also just indicate all zeros for that section. And we also want to know where they live. And we want to know their financial information. So we want to know how much your parents make for the year and make sure that when you're putting in this information, you're cross-referencing those tax forms. So some of you might not know what a 1040 form is, but you're going to have to learn what that form is because it's necessary in order for you to complete this application. You're also going to need to know what a W-2 is because often parents or students also have W-2 forms if they work, and we need that information on the FAFSA or the DREAM application. For our independent students, we're going to need your financial information. So if you have a 1040 form, if you have been working and you have a W-2, we're going to need you to put that information in there. If you are a student who is dependent, so you included your parent information, but you worked, then we also need your information on there in order to estimate how much financial aid we can go ahead and offer you. So now that you submitted all these 5 sections and you've completed them, you always want to go back and double check. Like I mentioned, you are going to be cross-referencing financial forms or tax forms, and you want to make sure that all the numbers that are included in there are correct, because sometimes we have students that accidentally add a 0 to their parents' income, and 1 0 can make a huge difference in the financial aid offer that we provide. So again, you want to make sure that your information is correct. You want to make sure your social security number is correct, that your name is correct and matches the school applications you're submitting. You want to make sure your emails are correct, that your parent information is correct, and most importantly, that the income information is correct. Once you've checked and triple checked that all your information is accurate, you want to go ahead and electronically sign the form and submit. In some cases, some parents may not be able to electronically sign the form. So what you'll do is you'll print out the signature page and you'll mail it out to the California Student Aid Commission. I would recommend mailing out several of these forms in different envelopes to make sure that they actually get there. And I would also recommend doing it as soon as you complete your application. So let's say you complete it on Monday night. By Tuesday morning, you should have that signature page mailed out, and then potentially another one in another 2 weeks, because you want to make sure that that signature page gets to the California Student Aid Commission in order for your FAFSA or DREAM application to be considered complete. Finally, for students who were able to electronically sign, you're going to get a confirmation through your email letting you know that you've successfully submitted your FAFSA or your DREAM application, and you're good to go. For our other students, your confirmation will come once you've actually submitted the signature page and the California Student Aid Commission has received it. You'll receive a confirmation that your application is completed. And again, we're doing all of this before the March 2nd deadline. Next slide, please. So why do we need all this financial information, and why do we need to know so much about you and so much about your parents? So we need to know this in order to come up with your expected family contribution. And this is a number that we use, or it's an amount that we use to estimate how much a family can reasonably contribute to their students' education. So we do take into account 2 components. Again, that'll be if we're relying on your parents' income or you're relying on your parents' income, we take that into consideration, the parent contribution based on their income and assets. If the student is working or if you're working, we also take that into consideration, and then we add both of them up to come up with your expected family contribution. Now, For some students, you might have a higher expected family contribution. So let's say an expected family contribution of $80,000 for the year. However, if you decide to attend a school that's only worth $30,000 or only costs you $30,000 a year, it doesn't mean that you have to pay $80,000. It just means that because your school cost is $30,000 and your expected family contribution is $80,000, that school will not be able to offer you any need-based financial aid. I actually have a calculation coming up in the next slide that'll explain it a little bit better. But you just want to keep in mind that even if your expected family contribution is $100,000, you don't have to come out of pocket $100,000. It'll just come into play once we compare it to the cost of the school that you're attending. And this information is calculated using the data from your FAFSA and your DREAM application. So again, that's why you want to make sure that everything is submitted correctly and that all the financial information on there is correct. Because if it's not, then that means that we calculated an incorrect expected family contribution, which will translate to an incorrect financial aid offer. And we actually want to avoid that. Next slide, please. So like I mentioned, we have a calculation here of your financial need, which I mentioned in the previous slide. So again, if your cost of attendance is, let's say, $50,000, and your expected family contribution is $10,000, then your financial need is $40,000. So at that point, the school that you'll be attending will go ahead and offer you need-based financial aid, which is considered as such as grants, scholarships, a subsidized loan, which is considered need-based, and work study. And so they'll go ahead and combine all of those things to help you with your need-based portion of your cost of attendance. Now, on the other hand, if your cost of attendance is $20,000 and your expected family contribution is $40,000, then that means that your financial need is actually a negative number. At that point, that means that you don't have financial need. So the school may not be able to offer you any need-based aid, such as like grant money or some certain scholarships, but they can offer you merit-based aid, which often come up with scholarship assistance. Next slide, please. So we did mention the expected family contribution and how it's a reasonable amount based on your family's income. However, we do understand that sometimes things change. So with COVID, we understand that a lot of things have changed in terms of the family income. So you want to make sure that whatever school you're attending is up to date on what your family income is, and actually that your FAFSA information, even though it's not accurate, that you get that school to change the information if there has been a loss of income. That can mean that your parents changed jobs and are currently being paid less, that there has been a change in hours, so if they're working less hours, or if they were receiving some sort of stipend or benefits, but they're no longer receiving that, that'll be included in the loss of income portion. So you want to make sure you notify your school as soon as possible. That way they can re-offer you financial aid and they can adjust your aid accordingly. In the special circumstances, we also include things such as high medical or dental expenses. So if your family had a medical emergency or had to pay for dental expenses that are over 11% of your total family income, then you want to make sure your school knows. That way they can offer you better financial aid, or they can make the adjustment to your financial aid so you can be considered for more assistance. Change in marital status also has an effect on your family income or what you're expected to contribute. So if for some reason you're married and you were separated, now you've become a one-person household. Same thing for parents. If the parents are married and now are separated and are now one-parent household, you want to make sure you let the school know, because at that point, potentially the expected family contribution will decrease now that it's only one income coming into that household. Now, if I haven't mentioned any of the the things that your family is currently experiencing, but have gone through a loss of income, then you want to make sure you let your school know. That way it could be taken into account. Even if you're unsure or if you think it might not qualify, you always want to make sure you double check with your financial aid office, because potentially they can offer you additional assistance. They would just need to review your case. So it's always best to ask. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned the deadline several times. I'm going to mention it again, March 2nd. Make sure you submit your applications by March 2nd. At this point, it's October 5th, so the application has been open for 5 days. So if you haven't submitted it yet, I would highly suggest getting around to it. You can access the applications again through the FAFSA through the app or the desktop, and the DREAM application you can access through a desktop as well. And you want to make sure you have all of those 7 sections we talked about completed, that the right information is on there, that you sent or mailed in your signatures. That way you go ahead and make sure that you get that confirmation page and you can be at ease because your application has been submitted before March 2nd. Now, when I mentioned that you want to make sure the application is complete, that does mean that you have to have at least one parent. If you're a dependent student, you have to have at least one parent's financial information on there. If there is no income information from a parent, if you're a dependent student, then your application will be considered incomplete. In some cases, you may not be able to submit parent information at all, and you would want to go ahead and speak with your school about that. But in general, if there's no parent information or income information, that's not a completed application. So you want to make sure you have everything filled in again by the March 2nd deadline. Next slide, please. So there may be additional applications that you need to submit. So for independent or private schools, you might need to submit the CSS financial aid profile. You don't need that for the UCs, but you do want to double check if you're applying for private schools or independent colleges. There might also be some institutional financial aid forms you need to submit. So if you're applying to UC San Diego and you're admitted, potentially you might be selected for verification, which means we need additional information from you. And you want to make sure you submit those documents as soon as possible, or at the very least before the document deadline. This might be the case for other UC schools or California state schools that you are selected for verification. So you want to double check with them what the application deadline is, so you can make sure you submit everything on time. There also might be additional scholarship applications. So we talked about applying on the websites such as like FastWeb, but also checking on your school's financial aid profile or financial aid website to see if there's any additional scholarship information. A part of this is checking if they have an additional application for scholarships. So you've submitted your application to attend the school, you've submitted your FAFSA or DREAM application, but you also want to make sure if that school has an additional scholarship application that you're submitting that as well. In terms of the UCs, our application is embedded into the actual admissions application, so you don't have to worry about looking for a supplemental application for us as an incoming student, but that's not always the case for other schools. So you want to double check that the other school doesn't have a different application to apply to. Next slide, please. So I just gave you a bunch of information, and I know you probably have a lot of questions. I hope that you've already been typing them in the chat. But if for some reason they weren't able to get to your questions, or I'm not able to get to your questions today, you can always contact our office at finaid@ucsc.edu. So via email, you can go to our website. We have an abundant amount of resources there. We have a lot of videos, which I recommend you look through because they'll do a much better job at explaining subsidized, unsubsidized, and Parent Plus loans than I did. So you want to make sure you're looking at that. You want to make sure you look at the videos about work study, about information about FAFSA. If you listen to me talk about the appeal and you think that's something that's going to apply to your family, you might also want to start looking at our appeal instruction information. That way you're kind of ahead of the game and you're already seeing, okay, well, I know I'm interested in submitting an appeal, or I know I'm potentially going to be interested in borrowing a loan while I attend school. So you want to be ahead of the game in that sense where you actually know what these things are, or at the very least, you know where to find them. Finally, you also want to go ahead and make sure you add UCSD to your FAFSA or DREAM application. So our school code is 001317. You can go ahead and take a picture or a screenshot of it. There's some times that students will add the University of San Diego school code or the Cal State San Diego school code, but we don't communicate that way. So you want to make sure you're actually adding UC San Diego on there, or else we're not going to get your financial information. And the University of San Diego and Cal State San Diego cannot send us your financial record. So you want to make sure, again, if we're your number one choice, that you're adding us in that top 10 schools, and that you make sure that the school code is correct.